In this studio, hardware doesn't get reviewed, it gets stress tested. This is the TerraMaster D4, a 4-bay NVMe USB 4 enclosure, and instead of running synthetic benchmarks, I wanted to see how it behaves during a real post-production workflow. Over the past week, I moved a real production project onto this system and worked on it for 8 to 10 hours per day, editing in Premiere and grading in DaVinci Resolve. Externally, the D4 is built almost entirely out of thick plastic, probably ABS, but it feels surprisingly solid and very clean in the hand. The design is minimal, compact, and elegant. It's also extremely light, which makes it much easier to carry around than its 4-drive layout might suggest. Opening it is very simple. There's just a single screw, and it can be opened entirely by hand without tools. Once inside, you find a lightweight aluminum internal frame with the NVMe slots on one side and the controller and supporting circuitry on the other. For this test, I used 2 different NVMe models. The first ones are WD Black SN850X 8TB drives, high-performance PCIe Gen 4 SSDs with onboard DRAM, designed for demanding sustained workloads. The other 2 are Lexar NM7904 TB drives, which are also very fast Gen 4 SSDs, but built with a more power-efficient architecture. On paper, both are extremely fast drives, but because of the higher NAND density and overall load profile, the 8 TB WD drives tend to run slightly warmer than the 4 TB Lexars. The first thing that concerned me, though, was thermals. The D4 does not include heatsinks for the SSDs, and whenever you pack 4 NVMe drives into a compact enclosure, heat is the first thing that comes to mind. So before doing anything else, I installed 4 low-profile aluminum heatsinks that I bought separately. They were inexpensive, but in this kind of setup, they make complete sense. Installation itself is extremely easy. Once the heatsinks are mounted, the 4 drives slide into place, the enclosure closes back up, and macOS recognizes everything immediately. The D4 is a DAS, not a NAS. It connects over USB 4 and works perfectly with Thunderbolt 4-based Macs. It doesn't offer hardware RAID, so the enclosure simply exposes the drives directly to the operating system. That means the performance and flexibility depend a lot on how you decide to configure the storage. My test setup was built around a Mac Studio M3 Ultra. Inside the enclosure, the 2 Lexar 4 TB drives were configured as a RAID 0 volume in APFS, and that became my main working drive. In a proper post-production setup, you should never use the system drive for everything. The internal Apple SSD should ideally be reserved for macOS and applications only. Then the workload should be separated. 1 drive for active project files and media, another drive for cache, and ideally a separate destination for backup. In my case, the RAID 0 volume handled the active project. One of the WD 8 TB drives was used for cache, and the second 8 TB drive held the original project copy and received the RAID backup at the end of each working day. RAID 0 is obviously about performance, and whenever performance increases, responsibility has to increase too. So for me, speed only makes sense if it's paired with a proper backup routine. The project I moved onto this setup is part of an upcoming 4-episode TV series that hasn't been released yet. For that reason, anything you see on screen from the editing or grading sessions will be intentionally blurred. The goal here isn't to show the content itself, but to show how the system behaves during real work. In total, the project is around 6 terabytes. That includes roughly 4.5 terabytes of 4K ProRes, 422 footage from Blackmagic cameras, along with drone footage, mixed codecs, and stills. The first real test for the system actually happened during the initial migration of the project. We copied the entire project from the external NVMe drive we had been working on into the new RAID volume. During that transfer, I observed burst speeds of roughly 250 gigabytes per minute. As expected, speeds then stabilize once NVMe cache behavior changes under sustained writes. That part is completely normal. What mattered to me was not the initial peak, but how the enclosure behaved after hours of real work. And this is where the biggest surprise happened. Before starting the test, my main concern was thermals. Packing 4 NVMe drives inside a compact enclosure with small fans usually means heat buildup. Instead, the opposite happened. Idle temperature was around 23 degrees Celsius, basically the same as the internal SSD in the Mac Studio. Under normal load, the drive stayed around 30 to 32 degrees, and even during heavier activity, I only saw rare peaks around 34 or 35 degrees. The fans only really make themselves known during startup, when they briefly spin up to maximum speed. After that, they become almost impossible to hear. Another strong point is portability. Because the enclosure is so light and the external power supply is also very compact. This makes it a very practical option as a set backup and ingest box. You can carry a large amount of storage in a single enclosure, connect it to a MacBook, ingest footage on location, check material, and even begin pre-editing or first-pass grading without much effort. For 4K post-production workflows, this setup is absolutely solid. And for many compressed 6K workflows, it still makes complete sense. Once you move into heavier 8K or 12K territory, interface bandwidth becomes the limiting factor. At that point, Thunderbolt 5 or DirectPC IE solutions become more appropriate. After several days of real editing and grading work, the TerraMaster D4 proved to be stable, quiet, and thermally controlled. Not just fast, but reliable under sustained workload. This was Studio Hardware Test, Episode 1. More tools will go through the same process under real workload inside a working studio.